How's it going, everybody? I'm Aaron Heiser of Maker's Leather Supply, and today we're going to do a down and dirty video on something I don't enjoy making. But knife sheaths. I get a lot of people call and ask if there are available patterns for knife sheaths. Do you make templates for knife sheaths, things like that? And what makes it difficult is 99% of the knives that you're going to come across that need to be having a sheath made for them, they're custom knives. They're all shaped different. They're all different sizes. They're all different whatever. And that's the problem with knife sheaths. And that's the problem with being a knife sheath maker, is that it's really a one-off thing. So I have developed a system of how I can make a knife sheath, basically inventing my own pattern as I go and everything. And I'm going to share that with you. I tell people all the time, like, as we go through this, you'll see why it's a one-off thing. I cut the pattern to pieces as I go. We'll make a little bit of it, then we'll cut the pattern and make some more of it and cut the pattern again, and by the end of it, we'll have a sheath and no pattern. So, all that to be said, let's get started on it. First off, this very, very fine cutting instrument here is a product of Mr. Scott Davidson of Solid Rock Knives in Alto, Georgia. He makes a lot of leather cutting knives as well. I've got several of his round knives and head knives and skiving knives and you name it. I've got a lot of his knives. I do appreciate that I can call the man a friend, but I love his knives too. They're over there sitting a hatchet that I don't need, but I had to have, and pretty cool hatchet. Anyway, let's get started with it. All right, so the first thing I like to start with is a pencil, a piece of cardboard, and my knife. I do not have a pencil it doesn't look like, but I've got pens, and since I never make mistakes, a pen will be okay. The cardboard here is just, it's a little bit thicker than poster board, but it's not quite, like corrugated cardboard that's going to get squishy. You can use a cereal box or something similar to that. This is about like a Cheerios box, maybe a little bit thinner. So the very first thing that I do when making a knife sheath is I decide how I want to carry this knife on my belt. All right. If you're going to make a sheath, it might as well attach to your belt. I understand some people are just making one for a protective thing so that maybe they can just throw their knife in their bag or something like that. Not the case here, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw my belt on here. This ruler is 2 inches wide. My belt's only 1.5 inches wide, so this will be an okay representation, okay? So I got to decide, how do I want to carry this, all right? I'm boring. I just need a regular old straight up and down sheath that I know will safely carry this knife. This is not a cheap knife by any means. But yeah, I don't need it canted one way or another on my belt. I don't need to draw it from the small of my back because I'm not Rambo. I just need to safely carry it when I go hunting or whatever I might be going out for. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it slightly below my belt line just because it does have a full-size handle on it, and I'm a big guy and it's kind of hard for me to reach really high, so I'm going to have it, the center point of it slightly below my belt line. All right, I've got the knife there. All I need to do now is trace the knife. Okay, and I want to do this as accurately as possible. I don't want to leave a 1/4 inch gap around it or anything like that. We'll do all of our measuring and stuff later for things like that. The handle is not as important, but it's still a little important. So I'm going to trace the entire knife with its handle. And then I'm very careful as I trace around the blade because I don't want my pen to ruin my very, very, very sharp blade here. It won't ruin it. I just don't want to sharpen it or, clean up any nicks that I might incur. All right. So there it is right there. See my knife? It's drawn on my paper. Now, I'm going to put this knife back in its original sheath and set it aside because I don't need it again for a while. Oop. I do need one more thing. I'm sorry. So this one is a little bit more difficult because, as you can see, the shape of the top of the handle here is kind of rounded. It's not just flat straight across. And that makes it a tiny bit more difficult, but not really so difficult that I need to worry about. But I am going to try to replicate that. Okay, I'm going to set the knife back down. I'm going to mark where this handle comes out right here, and again over here. And then I'm just going to draw that very light swooping line in there. Okay, just like that. Now my knife is drawn on there, and I can put it back in its sheath where it is safe from me hurting myself, because the likelihood of me hurting myself while messing with that thing on this bench is pretty high. Alright, okay, so this sheath is going to be very simple. It will have a back piece, which will include its belt loop. It'll have a welt. All knife sheaths should have a welt, okay? This knife sheath is only 7 to 8 inches thick, all right? But right here, it's super thick because it has a welt. If you don't put a piece of leather in there, in the middle right there, what's gonna happen is if you just have the front sewn to the back, you're gonna put a knife in there, it's gonna cut the stitches open, and you won't have a sheath anymore. Every knife sheath needs a welt if it's for an open blade knife. If it's for a folder, obviously the welt's not as important. Okay, but it's going to have a welt, it's going to have a front, and it's going to have a back, which includes the loop. All right, so I am going to take out a handy dandy ruler here, and I am going to basically redraw the blade 3/8 of an inch wider than the actual blade. Let me get a real ruler. That's actually part of a broken experiment of a ruler that I have done before. Get a blue one so you can see it. If I use my clear one, you won't be able to see it. But anyway, I want to make this sheath 3/8 of an inch wider on each side than the actual knife is. So I've got my 1/8 inch grid on this here ruler, and I'm going to basically make a little dotted line 3/8 of an inch away from the actual knife. And then I'm going to get to play my favorite game, which is connect the dots. Okay, so put the dots as often or as sparsely as you want, but you are the one that has to connect these dots and kind of follow the correct curvature of the blade and stuff like that. Okay. All right, so there's one side. Now I'm going to do the other side. And this is a very general and practical guide for knife sheath making, as a whole. It doesn't matter if I'm making this as a pancake style that is at an angle, or making it as a standalone sheath like this. The only thing it won't really help you with is a fold over style sheath. This one is not going to fold around the blade. It's going to be separate pieces of leather. Okay? All right. So now I got to connect those dots. Okay, so there we go. Okay, now I'm going to make these lines that I'm doing right now come all the way up to where I know the handle meets the knife. All right, and then I'm going to draw a line that matches the handle, the top, the very end of the handle where it meets the blade. Okay, I know I'm not very good at describing it, but there it is. You can see it right there. Okay, and it's okay to look rudimentary. We're going to refine as we go. Okay, we just need to get our basics down. Now, I am going to include on this a little fold over snap. that's going to come from the backside, fold over right here, and snap somewhere over here. And that'll help to keep this knife into position no matter if I'm having to climb over a fence or climb a tree running from a wild boar or whatever I may have to do. Last time I went hog hunting was a couple of years ago. Well, second to last time, and Clay Miller has a great picture of me falling in a pretty good sized river. Yeah, my balance isn't as good as I thought it was crossing the fallen tree that went over the river. I should have just gone the extra half mile around like he did. All right, so now that is basically the shape of the front of the sheath. Now I need to get the back of the sheath and the fold over, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and I'm just going to angle this in just a little bit. I want it wider than the handle, but not excessively wide so that it's, you know, cumbersome and going to catch things on my belt and stuff like that. Okay? So about like so, and about like so. And I'm just going to draw lines going straight up, and that's going to be the fold over that goes over my belt. I was a little bit wrong on the backside here. I'm actually going to follow kind of the contour of the handle because, again, I've got to do that fold over flap that will retain the knife into the sheath. So, yeah, in order to do that, I need to kind of make it match that skinniest part of the sheath right there. Okay? Now, I'm going to draw in that snap piece, okay? Now let's measure a snap right quick. I'm sure I have some over here. A line 24 snap is what I like to use. Okay, and I need to measure, it is at least almost 5/8 of an inch wide. So I need to make that strap 5/8 of an inch wide or even a little bit wider, okay? So what it is, it's going to come off of the back piece of this, from here all the way up to the fold over of the belt is one piece of leather. And this part, this part that's going to wrap around the knife is coming off the same, it's the same piece of leather, okay? When I'm making a knife sheath, I don't want to make this a separate tab that's going to sew in, because anything extra like that you have can be caught by the knife when you're trying to resheath it or pull it out or whatever, and it can be cut. It can be a wear point, all right? Now, I need this to come in at a pretty good little angle to be able to catch that part of that handle. Okay, so we're gonna say it comes off about like so. And it needs to be 3/4 of an inch wide. Three-quarters is going to be too wide. I'm going to go to 5/8, and the snap will be just a slightly smaller than the actual fold over. Okay, there we go. Now, I don't. When you're doing leather work, a lot of the time a angled cut like this is difficult. So we're just going to round that out with a hole punch once we draw this onto our leather. Okay, and then the same thing down here. We'll just use a hole punch and make that a round cut. Now, believe it or not, we're already ready to start cutting leather. Okay, so what I have to do is I have to cut out this entire piece of what I've drawn here. I'll take my my blade here, and I'm just going to carefully cut out my pattern. And all I'm cutting out is those outside lines, okay? And this cardboard's, like I said a while ago, is pretty thick, so it's actually going to take more than one pass, or I'm going to have to press down a lot harder with my little knife here. I used to make a lot of holsters when I was doing custom work for a living. And the cool thing about holsters is a Glock 19 is a Glock 19. Granted, you could add attachments to it and stuff like that, but for the most part, if someone called you and said, I have a Glock 19, I need a holster, then you already knew what it looked like. It wasn't like a knife where you're like, well, every knife is different. You got to bring it to me, and I got to make a one-off pattern, and blase, blase. There we go. I'm not worried about cutting out that belt. That was just a reference thing, so no need for that. Alright, here on the straight lines, I'm going to cheat a little. I'll just put my ruler up there. There we go. And I don't need this much of this sticking out here, so I'm just going to kind of cut off some excess so it doesn't catch something and rip. Alright. So here I'm gonna, just like I'm gonna do with the actual leather, I'll take a little hole punch and round those two. Too big. Okay, now, if that's where my belt is, then that's where I need to make this fold over come down, and I can figure out where it's going to end up sewing to the back of the knife sheath. Okay, and I may have to clip these corners down just a little bit because it's getting really close to that edge right there, and obviously we're going to have to sew down that edge as well. So, we got a bunch of different ways we can do that. One way is we'll just grab a round punch here. And now that's round. Okay? Didn't even know it was going to be so easy, did you? Alright. This is the back of the sheath. Okay? Now, what I have to remember is when I go to cut this out of leather, I think I need to flip it over. Let me think for a second. Yes, I need to flip it over. Okay, because you want the smooth side of the sheath facing out, but here we are. This is what you'd be looking at, the flesh side or the rough side of the leather. Okay? So, we got to transfer this onto a piece of leather now. There's several ways we can do that. We can draw it with a pen. We can get the leather a little bit wet and trace it on there with a stylus. For the use of camera and you being able to see, I'm going to use an ink pen. Not the most advisable way to do it, but this is for a video, not for me to have a new sheath. Don't get me wrong, this is still going to be my sheath, but I don't care if it has some ink on it, it's just my sheath. Okay? So, use that same ink pen. I'm going to trace this thing out. But again, I flipped it over. Okay? It's now face down on my leather. Again, this is way too much strap here, but that's okay. I want too much, and then I'll trim it down once I'm ready. I'm going to cut this piece out. I'm going to use the exact same knife I just did with the cardboard, but I'm not going to make you watch it. So that way when I turn it back on, this leather piece will be cut off and we will start the next part. Alright, so there we have it. Here it is, cut out of 6 to 7 ounce leather. You can use a little bit heavier if you like, but I don't like to use 910. I think it's a little bit too heavy. I wanted to make it out of russet, and I didn't have any that was in between those weights, so I'm making it out of 6-7. This sheath is not going to get a ton of use or wear. It's mostly just going to sit in the door compartment of my truck, but that's okay. So, what's next? We've got our back piece cut out and ready to go. Now we're going to cut out our front piece. All right. So, real simple. Remember that line we drew in right there to match the bottom of the handle? We're going to cut it out. Oh look, we now have our front piece ready to go. See how easy this is getting? Now I am going to pull my original knife out again, because that curvature right there, I'd like to kind of make sure that that matches what I need it to match. So I'm going to set the knife on there and give it a look. And that is good enough for what I'm doing today. Okay, I could try to sink it down a little bit more and get that curvature just dead on, but this is going to be more than fine. All right, so now transfer this to the leather, cut it out again. I'm telling you, it's not as hard as people think. Just need a little bit of direction. I made a lot of sheaths, and I really struggled with pattern making and stuff like that when I came up with this very simple solution and this little system that I do, and it works really well for me. And it's worked really well for the people that I've taught to do it at my shop, so hopefully it will work well for you. It's a beautiful thing about videos. I'm not trying to just explain it, I'm also able to show it. So that one I did face up. Remember the back part we did face down. I did this one face up because this is the face of the knife. So I'm going to cut that piece out. I'll do it off camera, or I don't know. It's only going to take me a minute. I'll just do it now. You can fast forward a little bit if you don't want to watch. All right, now we have the face of the sheath. All right, and I'm going to put it up against the back of the sheath just to make sure that they're matching up pretty good, and they certainly are. Ain't it cool? Okay, so now we have to make the welt. Guess how we do that? More cutting. All right, so on the welt, here's the biggest thing, is that knife blade comes in right here. There's a finger contour there, and then there's a thumb contour here. Now, you can't cut that into the welt, or else the knife blade won't go in. It will stop right there, or it will slice your leather. Either way, not good. So, I need to kind of imagine that this line, the blade line, goes straight up like that. And then this little bit of thumb hump back here just doesn't exist and goes straight up like that. Okay? That way the blade goes cleanly into the sheath. And now I cut it out again. Now this time Generally, when I cut a pattern out like this, I cut it just straight directly on the line. But on this one, I'm going to cut just to the border area, so the outside of this the knife line, just because I also want to make sure that the knife fits. If I make it too tight, then the blade will be rubbing on leather all the time, and it can dull the blade. Now, there's not even a space in between where I'm cutting and where the line is. I'm just cutting on that side of that line. I mean, that line's 0.5 millimeter wide because it's the width of the pin. Okay. Luckily I cut hard enough that it actually came out. Now, excuse me. I'm actually going to hold on to my knife blade portion here, because when I draw this on the leather, I'm going to put it back in there so that this piece doesn't, this is a very fragile piece. It can move, it can bend a little bit, and I don't want it to. I want it to maintain its shape, because I want it to be able to, I want to get a good tracing on it. Okay, so I'm going to hold the blade portion into it, and I'm going to start to trace around the outside, around the outside, around the outside. Okay, now, if you know that you can do this without moving, you can just hold the blade portion and remove this and then trace around the blade portion. But only if you know you can do that without moving your hand. Because if that moves, then your welt isn't going to be the right shape anymore. I have extremely shaky hands, but when both of them are on something, they'll hold it pretty still. So there we go. I now need to cut that out because that's my welt. You can double up the welt. Maybe if this was an extremely heavy-duty knife with a really thick blade or a hatchet or something like that, you could double it up and make this twice as thick, or you could just cut it out of a thicker leather. But this 6 to 7 is going to be fine for my project. All right. So I'm going to cut the camera off because it will take me a little bit more time to carefully cut out this little piece. No secrets to it. I'm just going to be cutting it out without trying to make mistakes. Yeah, we'll be back. All right, check it out. We have patterned and cut out an entire knife sheath. Now we get to see if it fits. So, what am I going to do? I'm going to... Well, the first thing I guess I really need to do is I need to take my fold over down and go ahead and sew it into place. All right, so I'm going to sew it right along there. First I'll glue it, but actually first I need to edge and burnish just that edge right there. Okay, and then I guess I could go ahead and do, no, I'll wait on that piece. I'll do it later. But I'm going to edge and burnish just that piece right there. Because once I sew and fold it down, it will it'll be very difficult to edge burnish it then, okay? And I won't be able to get down here. So, edge and burnish. Yeah. Here I have a Berry King #1 round edger, or a grooved edger, sorry. I like his grooved edgers the most, because over the years, as you sharpen them, due to the groove, which is these little lines here, there we go, sorry, the shoulders here, due to those, this edger will not get wider as I sharpen it through the years. unlike the common edgers and some of the other styles that are out there. Not that I enjoy sharpening edgers at all, but it's going to happen because I want to keep them. Can't just throw away an expensive edger every time it gets dull, right? That's rich people stuff. Alright. So I'm just edging that one part, front and back. And then I'll burnish it real quick. This, since I'm making this out of this russet leather, I'm not going to dye it. When the entire thing's done, I'll oil it. But that's it. That's all the finish I'm going to do on this. I absolutely love how naked russet leather, how it ages on its own, how it patinas with time and abuse and stuff like that. Okay, like that's fresh russet leather right there. But there is the money clip that I carry every day. Look how nice and shiny it is. That's just from my pocket. There's no sealant on that. I just put some oil on it, and I've been carrying it in my pocket for, I don't know. This might be the one I made in the video. So how many ever months ago that was. So that's what I love about russet. All right, so I'm going to use some token oil because that's what I got sitting right here on my counter. And again, I'm just doing this edge right here. Problem with edging naked leather is if you get your token oil or whatever burnishing compound you're using on the naked face of the leather, it can discolor it a little bit. Not really a huge deal for me with this project because again, it's mine and I don't care. And I know with age it'll all match up, but if this were something I was trying to convince a customer to buy, or I was making for a dear friend that, you know, I wanted it as pretty as it could be the day I gave it to him, then that's a problem. Okay. Alright, so I just use my finger with this token oil, kind of wipe it on, wipe it around. And then I'm going to wipe it back off. The excess, that is. Okay. And I'll take my scrap of canvas. That one's already got some colors on it where I did leather that was dyed or whatever with it. I'm going to grab a fresh piece of canvas here so that I don't transfer any color to this naked leather. Alright, then I'm going to do the other side of it here the same way. Excuse me. Okay. Go back, wipe the SS off, and grab my canvas and get to work on it. There will be certain little areas that we have to burnish before we do some assembly, and then here in a minute we'll have other areas where we have to do a burnish that, you know, won't be able to get to after assembly, stuff like that. One more reason that knife sheaths are not a fast one and done type thing. Alright, there we go. Now, I'm going to go ahead and fold it down and mark where I'm going to sew it, or where I'm going to put it, and then I'm going to put a little bit of glue on there so that I can glue it down before I sew it, okay? One of the things I want to be careful of is I want to make sure that this is like this layer of this and the bottom layer of this are lined up on top of each other, okay? And then I'm just going to take my scratch awl and mark the bottom border of it slightly underneath it so that I know where to put the glue. Okay, so very light scribe there. Got my water-based contact cement here is what I'm going to use. I've been playing with this stuff lately. I really like it. I didn't think I would get to where I liked a water-based contact cement, but I do enjoy the room not stinking when I open the jar. And honestly, it sticks just fine, especially stuff that I'm going to sew anyway. My biggest issue with it is it takes longer to set up and dry, but that's okay. I can check emails or whatever I need to do while I wait on it to dry. So I'm going to spread it out pretty thin because then it dries faster. Okay, and then I also need to put it up here on this end. And again, I'll spread it pretty thin and that way it dries faster. And I'm going to pause the camera for probably 10 to 15 minutes while this stuff sets up. Spread it even thinner here and get the excess off. Once it's clear, then I'll know that it's ready to stick together. So give me a minute and we'll be back. Alright, so now that glue is clear. And I'm just going to fold it over on itself here. Making sure it's lined up with the little markings I made. Okay, press it on there real good. Maybe even take a little hammer and give it a tappity tap tap. Just to help it make that adheration. I don't know. I think I struggled with that word last time I made a video too. To make sure it adheres well. How's that? So, now I need to draw me a stitch line on there, okay? So I'm going to use, let's say 7 stitches per inch. Let me grab I need a piece of rubber under here. You shouldn't do this on the HDPE board. I'm going to go across the bottom and then, or across, you know, about a ½ inch up off the bottom. And then I'll use my, my 2-prong one to go around that curvature there, okay? Generally I use 8 stitches per inch on wallets and stuff like that, but this is not a wallet, it is a knife sheath. A little bit bigger, bulkier stitch. All right, there it is. I'm going to hand sew that up right quick, and when we come back, we're going to do some gluing and mocking up. And the next thing we're going to have to mock up is to be able to get this to where it fits well over the handle and snaps down. All right, got that sewn on there. Check it out. So the next part we have to do is the welt needs to be glued onto the front piece here. Or it could be glued onto the back piece over there. It does not matter, but I prefer the front. Reason being is because once it is, I am going to edge burnish this top edge, and if those 2 little welt pieces are already on there, it will burnish with it beautifully, and I can trim them up to match nicely. If I glue the welt to the sheath itself, I don't have an opportunity to go back and trim up that top piece to match with the front of the sheath and make it all glorious and pretty, okay? So, I say you can do it either way. Just do it this way. It's a better idea. All right, so what I need to do is I need to glue that onto there, which means I need to bust out my contact cement. I'm going to put a little bit of contact cement around here. I'm going to put a little bit of contact cement around all this, and then I'm going to wait until they're ready to stick together, and I'm going to stick them together. And when I come back, I will trim and edge that, or burnish that top edge up there. Okay, so you can see there's glue on both of these. It's already dried until it's clear. So now I need to stick them together, and I'm going to do it very carefully and line up their edges just as perfectly as I can, because the better I line them up now, the less sanding I'm going to have to do before I burnish. The thicker an edge you have, such as this welted edge here, the more difficult it gets to sand it all nice and smooth for your final burnishing. Alright, good and stuck. I'm going to turn it over here. I'm going to beat it with a hammer a little bit just to make sure it's good and stuck. Okay, so what I need to trim and look at here is this very, very top edge right here. Okay, and I just want to make sure that those two edges match up really nice, and then I'm going to round it with an edge beveler and burnish it. Okay, get my piece of rubber out of the way here. It can be difficult to round that because you've got a place where when you push down in the middle, it's going to be hollow. So, oh look, we have a piece of leather that fits in there just like our knife does. Okay, check it out. Ain't it cool? So, we're going to burnish that edge real quick. And I should have trimmed that bottom piece first, but it's the bottom piece that needs trimming, so it's fine. Just a little bit of trim work here. There we go. And then I need to burnish out this little area, or bevel out that little area right there, and now I'm going to burnish that entire top piece. And I'm going to burnish it just like I did a while ago. Put some Tokonole on there, rub it all nice and smooth, and then when I'm done with that, we'll come back and we're going to start working on the area for the fold over that's going to hold the knife in, the retention strap. Alright, so I got a beautiful burnish on that little edge right there. Didn't take me but a few seconds, probably could have left the camera on, but I do try to save your time. I understand it's valuable. Alright, now this is when I like to turn this thing over and set my knife down in it the correct way, the correct direction, and just make sure it looks like it's going to fit. And this one is going to fit beautifully. It's not so loose that it'll rattle around, but it's not tight, and it's not going to be rubbing up against the leather constantly once it's all put together. Okay, so that's great. I am glad to know that this is going to fit, and I have not wasted both of our times on making this, because honestly I haven't done a knife sheath in a long time, and yeah, I always get concerned when making one that I am remembering how to do it correctly. Alright, now I need to get some of my little clips. Let me see. I don't have any on my desk here. I gotta go over to my sewing machine and borrow some of my sewing clips. I'll be right back. Alright, so I got some of my sewing clips here from my sewing machine over there. And what I need to do is kind of clip this together, carefully stick the knife down in there, and then figure out this fold over and where it's going to be, where it's going to fall, where the snap needs to be, you know, all those little details that are going to make it or break it. Okay, so I am trying to line up these edges just as carefully as if I was gluing them together and putting the clips on. It'll be easier after I get one on to hold the dadgum thing for me, and then I can just kind of go around it putting the others on. Alright, so there she is. I'm going to take my knife and I'm going to carefully place it in there, keeping in mind that this is not sewn. This could easily pop off and cut my hand pretty good. Okay, I'm going to take it in there until it kind of locks into... I just put it in backwards. I was wondering why it wasn't sliding nice and perfect like that. Leave me alone, folks. It's been a long day. Alright, now I'm going to take this, fold it over that like that, and kind of figure out where it needs to be. Okay, now I'm going to say it needs to be right there. That's a pretty good spot. This isn't going to come out with that right there. So, how do I make sure that I can mark that? Is I take this here scratch awl and I'm going to push it all the way through the first layer and into the second layer, just right in the center of that strap. There we go. Now I've marked where I need to put a button. Okay? So, I'm going to take this back apart. I'm going to get me an appropriate sized hole punch, and I'm going to put a button right there. A snap, if you will. Some people call them snaps, some people call them buttons, some people call me crazy. They're all right. Okay, so I need to punch a hole through the top layer here. I need to punch a hole through this layer here. Get out my anvil. And I'm going to have to pause the video for a couple of minutes while I find me a set of snaps. I know I had that one little piece, but it's silver, and I prefer like an antique brass, even though if I have a set of silver, I might use it nickel plate, not silver. But anyway, because the knife does have a bare metal here that people will be able to see, so I guess the silver would work, the nickel plate. Anyway, I'm going to have to find one, so I'll be right back. Alright. I have everything you can imagine in this office. I mean, this place is a leather worker's dream. But what I didn't have was a dadgum snap. So I was like, well, screw it. I'll use antique brass. Well, guess what? I didn't have one of those either. I had some parts, but I didn't have a complete snap. Story of my life. Alright, now this post is a little bit long for what I'm doing here. So what I need to do is grab me a Phillips head screwdriver so that I can get it a little bit pre-split, and that'll help set this a little better. So hang on just a second. Alright, when you have a snap that's not going to set very well due to maybe the post is too long or something like that, take a little Phillips head screwdriver, set it right in the middle of that post, and just give it a couple of little taps, okay? You're not setting it with this screwdriver. What you're doing is you're getting that post split so that once you use your snap setter, it's just gonna go beautifully. Okay? I'm gonna have to hang this over the side of my anvil just a tiny bit because of the welt that's already glued on there. There we go. Set it beautifully, set it the first time. Two things that people have a hard time with. And also it's set straight. If you look at the front and the back, they're directly over each other. Absolutely nothing worse than setting a snap and then realizing it moved over 1/8 of an inch while you were setting it. Okay, now for the other half of the snap. I'm just using this post to kind of spread out that little hole that I punched there. Alright. Same thing. I'm going to use that little screwdriver just to make sure that I have a successful snap here. Okay. Now I'm ready to set it good. Turn the snap setter over. It's not on there good and tight yet, so I'm going to bang on it some more. There we go. Good and tight. Sounds like Guten Tag. Alright, so now I glue the front to the back. And then I stitch it. And then I do all the rest of my sanding and edge burnishing. Okay? So first things first is that glue. First thing before I even glue it though, I'm going to take my fingernail. Actually, I don't need to. I can see that these corners right here, here and here, are where I need to stop with my glue. So I won't accidentally take my glue line too far. Okay? I am running out of camera battery, so I'm going to put glue on this off camera, and then when it's ready to stick together, we'll come back and we'll stick it together. Alright. Alright. Got a few minutes charge on my little camera here, and this thing is ready to stick together. Okay? So, again, I want to stick it together very carefully, because the better I can line up the edges, the less work it will be when I have to finish all those edges. Okay? So I'm going to kind of stick it together up here. Make sure it's stuck together down here. And then stick it together up here, just to make sure everything's really lined up, and then I can go back and squeeze all the little pieces together. Like so. And it does look pretty rough. I've got a lot of sanding to do. Okay? But that's okay. It's going to be awesome when it's done. And that's why we have that welt is 3/8 of an inch wide. So we got lots of room to stitch and to sand and to finish. Okay? Because we are making a basic knife sheath. We're not trying to make one that's just so form-fitted that there's no room for error and all that when we put it together. This is the basics. This is knife sheath making 101, not 201 or 301 or whatever else college classes go up to. I don't know. I didn't finish. I went to Baghdad University and I got one hell of an education and entertainment, I guess. Alrighty, okay, I need some wing dividers because we're going to mark our stitch line onto here, okay? I'm going to mark my stitch line, I'm going to stitch it, and then I am going to do all my trim up and everything to make everything match up beautifully and sand it and all that stuff. But first I'm going to stitch it because that's what will hold it together while I do the rest of it. Okay, I've got myself a pretty generous stitch line here. I don't know, 3/16 or so. It's a little more than an eighth. It's not quite a quarter. Again, I want it to be generous because I've got room to be generous. Okay? And as a matter of fact, you know what? I know I'm using my wing divider, but instead I'm going to go back. I'm going to use my stitch groover on this piece. I hardly ever use my stitch groover. I do like it, I just hardly ever use it, okay? So give me a second to find the one I'm looking for. This old Barry King here will do, okay? Now the reason I would use a stitch groover on a knife sheath is because this knife sheath, like a holster, will take a lot of abuse. And by grooving it, it'll make sure that that stitch sits down underneath the top layer of leather. Okay? I go very slow with the groover because I'm not super well versed in using one. Because again, I don't use one all that often. Some people use them on every single project, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. It's just not something I use a lot. Alright, now, stitching. Okay, I am going to use our diamond point stitching chisels on this, I think. I need to check depth. Yeah, It is long enough to go all the way through. I'm not using my normal pricking irons that I use because these are they're not heavy duty enough for this kind of thickness, okay? I use them on wallets and things like that all the time, but when it comes to something this thickness, I am not going to risk breaking a tine off of the, I think they're called a tine, but breaking a piece off of those, okay? So, look at that, beautiful, goes right through, just the depth I need. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention, when I put that snap on there, I could have taken a very thin piece of leather and lined the back of the snap so that it might never touch the blade of the knife. And that probably would have been smart. Again, this is a very nice Damascus knife. He told me where the Damascus came from. Apparently it was some famous place that makes Damascus. But I did not do it because the other thing I risk is, you know, when you put your knife in there, it can catch the edge of that little piece of leather after some time. I mean, I'm sure at first it'll stick real good, but after some time it could catch the edge of it, and then that would ensure that the knife blade runs right up against that daggum snap back there, okay? So, I'm just going along, punching my stitching holes, then I'm gonna hand stitch it. Then we're going to do some edging on this bad boy, okay? So I'm going to turn off the camera because you've seen me stitch in all the other videos. If you need videos on hand stitching, there's some great ones right here on YouTube. So you feel free to reference one of those. I don't teach hand stitching in every one of my videos because people that watch all of my videos are going to get very tired of hearing me say the exact same thing over and over, such as the speech I just made about why I don't teach hand stitching in my videos. Alright, so we'll be back. Alright, so there it is, sewn together. I did take the part that I'd cut out that was the blade and put in there so that when I put it into my stitching clamp, it was nice and flat all the way across, and that just helps the needle pass straight through the holes that were punched straight. Now, if you look at areas like this right here, see where it's almost like a ladder or a stairwell. This edge, then the middle edge is out a little bit more, and then the back edge is out a little bit more. When you go to sand it all smooth to get this to look like it's one layer, areas like that can be problematic. So we can take a knife and try to cut those bottom two edges. What I'm going to try, and I say try because again I don't make a lot of these here lately. I'll tell you what, the irony of it all, I'll use another Scott Davidson knife here, big old head knife I've got, and I'm going to try to just press straight down from the first layer and cut those other two layers off as I go. Okay, and you got to do everything you can do to try to get it as even as it can be with a knife and with trimming before you take it over there to sand. Okay, and then when there's other areas where maybe the middle layer is the only one sticking out, you can use like a French edger or something like that. I can show you what that looks like in just a second. Take this over here to the edge of the cutting board. Alright, so another little trick, I'll grab a French edger and show you how that works. And you want one that's kind of an appropriate width, you know, kind of similar to the width of what you're using here. But if you take this and you push it along here, it will find those high spots and kind of cut them off a little bit, like that. It really does a great job of it. This is pretty much the primary function of a French edger as far as anything I use them for in my shop. I know there's lots of leather workers that use them for tons more than just this, but this is what I like to use them for. This is the reason I justify owning French edgers. Then turn it over and look at it from the back and make sure that it's all flat and straight. You can see where the layers are not matched up, you know, and again, the more of it you can cut off with a knife or an edger or something like that, the less sanding you'll have to do. Okay? All right, now my drum sander is over there, and it is not on where I can put it on camera, but it's basically it's the Cobra burnisher, so it's just a round sanding disc, and it's going to sand these edges to where they're nice and flush all the way across. Okay, that's all it is. That's all it's going to do. And when I come back, we'll finalize these edges and clean this sucker up and be done with it. Not bad. Total time for this video so far, I mean the video itself is however long it ends up being, but I started this video at 2 p.m. and it is now 4:20. Not bad. Sorry, that's 4:40. Alright, so I sanded all those edges and they are nice and uniform, and there's no high spots. I don't believe there's any low spots. We should probably test this thing. I'll pull that out and make sure that the knife fits in it, right? Like a glove. I'm going to take and just round off that right there. I don't want to cut it too close to the button because I want to have a little bit of room to put a thumb under there and pull that sucker off. Okay, put my knife away one more time because so far I hadn't hurt myself with it. I'd like to keep it that way. There we go. So that'll make it to where that's just barely past that, and that'll make it real easy to reach down there with a finger and just click it right off. Okay? Now, I need to edge this with the same edger I was using earlier, that little number 1. Okay? But then I need to edge the main body of the sheath where it's thick. I need to do it with a much thicker, bigger edger. So I'm going to use a number 3. It's not often I use an edger that big, but it's not often I make something out of, 18 to 21 ounces of leather. And combined, that's what this is. This is 3 layers of 6 to 7, so 3 times 6 or 7 is somewhere between 18 and 21. I want to edge it to round these edges like I should, but I also want to get rid of all that ink. That's the one thing about using an ink pen is when you're doing your edges, if you don't get all the drawn line off of it, then now you got a black ink on your project, and that doesn't look cool. Alright, so that was that part. Now I'm going to grab this number 3 and do the main body of the sheath, and then I'm going to use that same token hole to do my edges, and yeah, it's going to be the same process as I did with the that first edge and second edge that I burnished there. So yeah, we're about done. It's really not all that difficult when you get down to it. I tried not to use too many specialized type tools. I understand that not everybody's got the tool collection I have. This can be done with some very, very basic tools. A box cutter to use as a blade. You need a good edge beveler if you're doing any kind of leather work. If you don't have one, you could even try to sand the corners off those edges. It's doable. I did it lots when I was doing leather work in Cuba and Baghdad and everywhere else I've been in the world. I've been lots of places where I didn't have any leather tools, but that didn't mean I didn't get lots of leather work done. Alright, so I'm going to token all this up and do all my burnishing and stuff, and when I come back, we'll just kind of give a once over and look at it, and we'll sign off. Alright, so my battery got so low that it needs charging while I use it, and I can't charge it while it's up there mounted to the ceiling. So here we go. Here's our knife and our sheath. All the edges are done. Sorry, I know that is just terrible. All the edges are done. Everything is pretty, at least as pretty as it's going to be on this one. I did give it a little spray and put my maker's mark on the back finally. I always forget to do that on stuff I'm making for videos. But there you go. I hope you learned something. I hope you're able to use these instructions to make a sheath. I mean, they work for almost any knife that you can put out. It's a very simple method, and it makes a simple sheath, but it works. And yeah, that's the main thing in my book, is it works. So until next time, I'm Aaron Heiser of Maker's Leather Supply, and I hope you have a great day.